Harley Davidson just broke its silence, and what the CEO said has only made things worse. Sales are plummeting, the stock is crashing, and across the country, riders are furious, accusing the company of going woke and abandoning everything it used to stand for. Now, after months of outrage, Harley's top executive has finally responded. But is it a real course correction or just corporate spin? What's happening? After months of silence amid mounting backlash, Jochen Zeitz, the CEO of Harley Davidson, finally broke his silence. Riders were furious, dealers were frustrated, and investors were anxious. Everyone was waiting for answers. When the long-awaited statement arrived, it was supposed to bring clarity. Instead, it deepened the divide. In his official announcement, Zeitz attempted to walk back the most controversial elements of Harley's recent political direction. The company declared it would distance itself from diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, would re-emphasize its commitment to traditional motorcycle culture, and promised to refocus on its core base. The language sounded strategic, but to loyal riders it sounded rehearsed and hollow. Zeitz ended the message with a familiar slogan, "United, we ride." But this time, it didn't land. Riders saw it for what it was, a polished phrase meant to calm tensions without any real course correction. Online reactions were swift and brutal. Forums lit up with outrage. Facebook biker groups mocked the statement. Memes began circulating comparing Harley Davidson to soulless tech companies. The sense of betrayal deepened, and riders openly asked whether this was an olive branch to their community or a strategic memo aimed at Wall Street. Every word in the statement was picked apart. The tone was sanitized, full of corporate jargon, and noticeably lacking in emotional authenticity. Harley had once been a company that spoke from the heart of the road. Now it sounded like a brand trying to repair its image for investors, not rebuild its trust with bikers. The phrase, returning to core values, rang empty when so many of those values, freedom, rebellion, brotherhood, had already been replaced by vague promises and branding buzzwords. Some riders wanted to believe it, but for many it was too late. Trust had been broken, and this statement didn't repair the bridge, it poured gasoline on the fire. But the statement didn't calm things down. It blew the whole thing open. The backlash didn't end. It exploded. Across the country, a storm was brewing that no press release could contain. Loyal Harley owners, once proud to display their bikes and apparel, were now uploading videos of themselves trading in their motorcycles. Some filmed themselves removing Harley decals, others burned their Harleys on camera. What began as grumbling on social media erupted into a full-blown grassroots rebellion. The message was clear. Harley had abandoned its tribe, and the tribe was ready to strike back. Dealerships, many of which had been in business for decades, began reporting a dramatic drop in foot traffic. Once bustling showrooms were empty. Sales managers described the atmosphere as eerie and tense. Salespeople whispered that the brand they once loved was becoming a liability. In interviews, longtime dealership owners said they felt abandoned by corporate leadership. They had spent years building trust with their communities, only to see that trust eroded by decisions made in boardrooms far removed from the open road. The cultural divide grew even deeper. Baby boomer riders who had stuck with Harley through thick and thin felt personally insulted by the company's tone-deaf pivot. Meanwhile, younger riders, the very audience Harley hoped to attract with its sustainability messaging and electric models, weren't buying in. To many in Gen Z, Harley Davidson felt like a relic of another era trying too hard to be relevant. Instead of closing the generational gap, the company widened it. Even comedians and influencers started piling on, joking that Harley had become a clown suit for corporations, dressing up its past to cover its future mistakes. Riders didn't just walk away, they walked out in protest. And while riders were walking out, so were investors, with even more brutal consequences. When the riders left, the money followed. What began as a rider-led cultural rejection soon manifested as a financial freefall. Harley Davidson's stock value began slipping almost immediately after the CEO's statement went public. Over the past 5 years, the company had already struggled to maintain its valuation amid global shifts in transportation and generational disinterest in motorcycles. But this was different. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about faith, and Harley's investor base was losing it fast. Quarterly earnings fell short of already lowered expectations. Revenue dropped sharply, Executives scrambled to hold emergency meetings to reassure stakeholders that the backlash was temporary. But behind closed doors, panic was setting in. The company was bleeding credibility, and with it, money. Dealerships received quiet directives from regional managers to begin clearing out inventory at all costs. Massive discounts were offered. Financing options were stretched. Trade-in values were artificially inflated. Still, the bikes wouldn't move. Floor plan interest, the monthly cost dealers pay to keep inventory on site, began to pile up. Some dealers were openly discussing whether they would survive the year. Market share in the United States slipped as competitors filled the vacuum. Indian motorcycles surged ahead. Honda and Triumph captured buyers looking for quality without the controversy. Harley's premium pricing no longer made sense to a public that saw the brand as unstable. Analysts began to change their language. Where Harley had once been called a reliable legacy stock, it was now referred to as a distressed brand. Financial publications questioned whether Harley Davidson could weather the cultural storm it had helped create. The message was loud and clear. Investors no longer believed Harley knew who it was. We dug through the numbers, the statements, the spin, so you didn't have to. If that's worth something to you, hit subscribe. And while Harley's soul disappeared, someone else quietly stole it. Indian didn't just compete, it conquered. In the early 2010s, Harley Davidson still looked untouchable. Despite rising concerns over its aging customer base and controversial marketing pivots, it remained the face of American motorcycling. But in the shadows of Milwaukee's struggle, another American legend was quietly preparing its return, this time under new leadership and with a clearer vision. Indian motorcycles, revived by Polaris Industries in the year 2011, didn't just re-enter the market, it launched a calculated campaign to reclaim everything Harley was walking away from, and riders noticed. Polaris did not try to reinvent Indian with flashy modernity or corporate buzzwords. Instead, it reached back into the roots of motorcycling, into the heritage of long-distance touring, chrome aesthetics, and mechanical rumble. The result was a lineup that spoke the language Harley had seemingly forgotten how to speak. Models like the Indian Chief and Indian Scout were designed with reverence, not disruption. Riders who once bled orange and black started taking long looks at the Thunderstroke engine, the handcrafted detailing, the simplicity of design, and asking one hard question: why does this feel more like Harley than Harley? And the moment Indian released the Challenger, the war turned kinetic. Positioned directly against the Harley Davidson Road Glide, the Challenger didn't just match it in specs, it outpaced it in features and price. Liquid-cooled V-twin, electronically adjustable suspension, modern infotainment, and a price tag that made even loyal Harley owners blink. It was not a shot across the bow, it was a broadside. What made Indian's rise so devastating to Harley wasn't just the machines, it was the philosophy. Indian didn't engage in corporate grandstanding or political declarations. It didn't apologize for its customer base. Instead, it quietly embraced patriotism, craftsmanship, and the freedom that motorcycles had always symbolized. While Harley got lost trying to please both investors and activists, Indian zeroed in on riders. It stayed focused, and in doing so, it stole the emotional loyalty Harley had once taken for granted. Across dealerships, forums, and rallies, the evidence mounted. Former Harley owners shared photos of their new Indians, describing how they hadn't felt connected to a brand in years, until now. These weren't just bike swaps, they were cultural divorces. Riders said Indian reminded them of what Harley used to feel like: the outlaw spirit, the pride of American iron, the mechanical growl that spoke louder than marketing slogans. Indian conquered not by being louder, but by being more authentic. But Harley's most dangerous rivals weren't even in the West. They were waiting across the Pacific. Japan's revenge, the quiet empire that outsold Harley. For decades, Japanese motorcycle brands were seen as the pragmatic choice. Dependable, affordable, efficient, not exactly thrilling, but always reliable. But in the shadow of Harley's identity crisis, Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki saw an opportunity and pounced. What followed wasn't loud or flashy. It was methodical, strategic, and quietly devastating. Honda's Rebel series, especially the Rebel 500, became a category-defining cruiser for entry-level and mid-weight riders. It was lightweight, stylish, and priced for accessibility. The Shadow line gave traditional cruiser fans the sound and feel they wanted, without the mechanical drama. But it was the Gold Wing that reminded the industry why Honda was a juggernaut. For long-distance touring, no bike offered better comfort, features, or reliability. Where Harley's tours required constant care and overpriced add-ons, the Gold Wing simply delivered. Kawasaki entered the cruiser market with the Vulcan, a model that offered true muscle bike feel with unmatched maintenance simplicity. And Yamaha's Bolt and VMAX fused classic American style with Japanese engineering. The message was simple: we can do what Harley does, but better, cheaper, and with less hassle. Younger riders noticed. In a world increasingly shaped by student loans, inflation, and limited garage space, Japanese bikes made emotional and financial sense. A Harley might be a symbol, but a Rebel 500 was freedom you could actually afford, and that meant everything to new riders. There was another layer too. These brands didn't try to repackage themselves into cultural avatars or political statements. They didn't release corporate videos on equity initiatives or rebrand their dealerships with slogans. They stayed apolitical, focused, and approachable, and that clarity made them trustworthy. In the end, it wasn't about horsepower or heritage, it was about trust, and Japan had earned it. And while Japan took Harley's young audience, Harley made one last desperate move. The wrong one. Livewire, the electric motorcycle that fried the brand. The Livewire was announced with great fanfare. It was sleek, electric, and unlike anything Harley had ever built, and that was the problem. From day one, traditional Harley riders were confused, even offended. Where was the rumble? The visceral torque? The soul? The Livewire looked more like a Tesla on two wheels than the gritty cruiser they loved. And the price tag, just under $30,000, was the final insult. Even if a rider was open to electric technology, the Livewire came with too many compromises. Its range was limited. Charging times were frustrating. And unlike other EVs that offered convenience, the Livewire was neither practical nor thrilling. It didn't speak to Harley's history or its riders' needs. It felt like a tech demo dressed in leather. As sales floundered, Harley made a baffling move. It spun Livewire into its own brand. In doing so, the company doubled down on alienation. Riders felt abandoned. Instead of fixing the core problems or improving the gas-powered lineup, Harley was signaling that it was done with its past. Done with them. Livewire became the symbol of Harley's deeper failure. The belief that technology could replace tradition, that branding could replace loyalty, and that silence could replace dialogue. And while Harley chased the future, its past collapsed, with real-world consequences. The myth of Made in America just died in Milwaukee. Harley didn't just outsource parts, they outsourced trust. Marketing campaigns echoed with phrases like "forged in freedom," "American by birth," and "built with American pride." Commercials showed sparks flying from Midwestern welding shops, riders cruising Route 66, and flags waving in the wind. It was never just about horsepower, it was about heritage. But somewhere along the way, that promise began to unravel. Harley Davidson, under mounting financial pressure and global supply chain demands, began sourcing more and more of its critical components from overseas. Engines were no longer entirely built in Wisconsin. Transmissions, many came from Austria. Electronic systems and sensors, imported from Mexico, China, and Japan. In an era where efficiency often trumps identity, Harley quietly shifted away from its Made in America legacy, and the riders noticed. What made it worse wasn't just the decision, it was the deception. For years, Harley's marketing continued to imply that every bolt, frame, and piston was American-born. Riders who paid a premium for patriotism felt betrayed when they learned their motorcycles contained foreign parts. Suddenly, the bike that once screamed red, white, and blue felt like a corporate mirage. And once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to weld it back together. The backlash came fast. Forums lit up with angry posts from longtime customers. Some shared photos of VIN plates and part numbers that traced back to overseas suppliers. Others posted videos calling Harley a fraud. What was once pride had turned to disgust. Riders began to ask, how can a company built on rebellion, freedom, and American steel outsource the very soul of its machines? Politicians noticed too. Senators from Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, both states with deep Harley manufacturing roots, publicly criticized the company. Labor unions issued press releases condemning Harley's offshoring moves. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, which had represented Harley employees for decades, accused the company of abandoning American workers in favor of shareholder gains. Governors from Harley-hosting states demanded answers, but the damage was already done. Harley's leadership attempted to defend the decision, claiming that global sourcing was necessary to remain competitive. They pointed to rising costs, supply chain shortages, and international demand. But for riders who had proudly purchased Harley for its national symbolism, those explanations fell flat. When your entire brand is built on American craftsmanship, importing foreign parts isn't just a business decision, it's a philosophical betrayal. Harley Davidson didn't just shift manufacturing, they shattered a myth. And in doing so, they disconnected from the very audience that had once carried them through wars, economic collapses, and cultural revolutions. But outsourcing didn't just hurt feelings, it's become a cultural battlefield. When brands pick sides and lose half their customers. When Harley Davidson's leadership embraced corporate activism, they didn't just update the brand, they detonated it. What began as a series of boardroom decisions, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, announcing bold environmental, social, and governance commitments, and pledging climate initiatives, quickly turned into a full-blown identity crisis. These were the kinds of moves that looked good on investor decks, press releases, and LinkedIn. But to Harley's core customer base, it was a declaration of war on the very values that had defined the brand for more than a century. For the typical Harley rider, often a working-class, blue-collar American with deep roots in tradition and patriotism, these changes didn't feel like progress. They felt like erasure. Riders didn't see themselves reflected in corporate pledges about equity metrics and carbon-neutral goals. Instead, they saw a brand that no longer respected them. "I ride to escape politics," one lifelong customer posted. "Now Harley wants to turn my bike into a billboard." That post was shared over 15,000 times across Facebook groups and motorcycle forums. Many riders described the new Harley as Hollywood Davidson. The rumble of rebellion was being replaced by boardroom buzzwords. Where the company once stood for individual freedom, self-reliance, and anti-establishment grit, it now projected the polished language of multinational corporations trying to stay on the right side of history. Harley executives had clearly hoped to broaden the brand's appeal, but in doing so they cut out the very heart of what made Harley legendary: loyalty rooted in identity. This wasn't about resistance to progress. It was about trust. Biker culture has always been diverse in its own way. Riders don't care what you look like, who you vote for, or where you come from, so long as you ride with respect. But they do care about authenticity. Harley's push into social messaging didn't feel authentic. It felt performative. And performative politics in a culture built on authenticity? That's a death sentence. As the culture war intensified in American life, Harley didn't just get caught in the crossfire, it walked into it willingly. The company's leadership seemed to believe that staying silent on cultural issues was no longer an option, so they spoke up. But the backlash was immediate and intense. Riders felt like they were being preached to instead of supported. "We're not your problem," another post read. "We're the ones who kept you alive through recessions, recalls, and gas shortages, and this is how you repay us?" While Harley stumbled, other brands thrived by staying silent. Indian Motorcycles, Royal Enfield, and Triumph quietly avoided the entire minefield. They didn't post hashtags or issue statements. They built bikes. They leaned into their heritage without politicizing it. Their silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline, and it paid off. Market share for these brands ticked upward just as Harley's declined. Riders weren't asking their motorcycle company to solve the world's problems, they just wanted a machine that felt like home. Harley tried to appeal to a new audience, but the new audience didn't come, and the old one left. The backlash didn't just damage sales, it fractured the bond between a company and its culture. Once lost, that kind of trust is almost impossible to rebuild. But while Harley was being torn apart by domestic controversy, a much bigger threat was already brewing on the global stage. Because when politics hits the supply chain, it doesn't just wound a brand, it bleeds it dry. Trade wars, tariffs, and the death of American bikes. Even before the cultural backlash began, Harley Davidson was quietly losing a different kind of war. One fought through international trade agreements, tariff disputes, and supply chain shifts. And when those pressures hit, Harley wasn't just a company in crisis, it was an American icon being held hostage by global economics. It started during the Trump administration when the United States imposed steep tariffs on imported aluminum and steel. In retaliation, the European Union slapped equally harsh tariffs on American-made motorcycles, raising Harley's export costs by as much as 31%. That meant every bike Harley shipped to Europe suddenly became thousands of dollars more expensive. Overnight. For a company already struggling to stay competitive abroad, it was a devastating blow. To avoid the impact, Harley made a controversial move. It began shifting production of European-bound motorcycles to a plant in Thailand. The goal was simple: dodge the tariffs. But the message to American consumers was devastating. The brand that had once wrapped itself in the stars and stripes was now building bikes overseas to avoid paying American-made costs. It didn't matter that Harley still manufactured many bikes domestically. In the eyes of its most loyal customers, it had betrayed its roots. The outrage was swift. American unions condemned the move. The United Auto Workers and local steelworkers organizations accused Harley of selling out American labor to protect executive bonuses. Even Donald Trump, once a fan of the brand, blasted Harley publicly for waving the white flag. Political commentators on both the right and left used Harley's decision as a talking point about the dangers of globalization and corporate disloyalty. To make matters worse, Harley's move didn't even work as intended. The tariffs didn't disappear. Political tensions escalated, and new trade policies made it even harder for Harley to navigate international markets. Instead of finding a new foothold, the company ended up stuck. Too expensive for Europe, too controversial at home. Harley became the poster child for everything that had gone wrong with American manufacturing. It symbolized the slow collapse of industrial self-reliance. The cost of a Harley wasn't just driven by materials, labor, or brand prestige. It was weighed down by politics. Every additional layer of tariff, tax, or international dispute added another reason for customers to walk away. Meanwhile, smaller brands and foreign competitors didn't face the same pressures. They built where they sold. They kept prices low, and they weren't tangled in political PR disasters. Harley's supply chain wasn't just inefficient, it was politically toxic. That combination turned every new model into a financial and ideological risk. But even as Harley flailed in the global trade storm, new forces were quietly preparing to move in and take everything. The rise of the unseen competitors. In the background of Harley's identity crisis and global manufacturing mess, a new threat emerged, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Chinese brands like CF Moto, QJ Motor, and Benelli began flooding the global market with affordable, well-built motorcycles that offered something Harley couldn't: value. Real, undeniable value. These companies weren't trying to copy Harley, they were building something entirely different. Sleek, lightweight, tech-forward bikes aimed at the next generation of riders. Where Harley still marketed itself with bald eagles and bar and shield nostalgia, these brands talked about Bluetooth connectivity, app-based diagnostics, and smart helmets. And they did it at a fraction of the cost. In many Asian markets, you could buy a brand new electric motorcycle for under $4,000, less than a fifth of what a Harley Livewire costs. And the timing was perfect. Generation Z, which now makes up the fastest-growing segment of new motorcycle buyers, isn't interested in old-school iconography. They want clean lines, low maintenance, smart tech, and budget-friendly pricing. They don't care about the rumble of a V-twin, they care about battery life and mobile integration. Harley has no foothold in this world. It doesn't have a scalable electric lineup. It doesn't have pricing that appeals to the entry-level buyer. It doesn't have a presence in Southeast Asia, where motorcycle use is exploding. And more importantly, it doesn't have cultural relevance among young riders in China, India, or Indonesia. Meanwhile, these unseen competitors are rapidly scaling. They're forming partnerships with local governments, expanding factory capacity, and entering European and Latin American markets. They aren't waiting for permission, they're taking over. Harley isn't just fighting legacy competitors now. It's facing an entirely new ecosystem that doesn't care about its past and isn't threatened by its name. The battle for the soul of motorcycling is no longer about chrome and thunder. It's about access, efficiency, and global agility. So will Harley go quietly or make one last stand? The final ride. Will Harley reclaim its soul or die corporate? Harley Davidson still has a path back, but it won't be paved with marketing jargon, social campaigns, or executive statements. It will come from something deeper, a return to what made Harley great in the first place. Culture, community, and unapologetic grit. Harley must rebuild trust. That starts with riders, not just talking to them, but listening. Riders don't want perfection, they want realness. If Harley returns to making bikes that are built to ride, not to impress shareholders, the loyalty can return. The market isn't asking for the past. It's asking for something that feels like the past. Something rooted in tradition, but responsive to the times. They must also reclaim manufacturing. Bringing jobs back home isn't just economic, it's symbolic. If Harley reopens American factories, commits to domestic assembly, and stands behind American labor, it can win back the riders who feel abandoned. The models need to change too. Reintroduce an entry-level cruiser under $10,000. Simplify the lineup. Stop chasing luxury and start delivering accessibility. Offer something for the young rider with a working-class budget. And refine, don't abandon your electric strategy. Build bikes for people who ride, not just for headlines. Brands like Indian, Jeep, and Ducati have done this before. Indian leaned hard into Americana. Jeep reintroduced the Gladiator and embraced off-road identity. Ducati rebranded with the Scrambler and modern lifestyle aesthetics. All three understood something Harley forgot. Your brand isn't your logo, it's your tribe. Harley's future depends on whether it chooses culture over corporate ego. Riders don't want to be told what to believe. They want to be invited to ride again. The road to redemption isn't closed, but it's narrowing fast. And if Harley misses this turn, it may never get another. What happens next isn't just about motorcycles, it's about what kind of country, what kind of company, and what kind of culture we choose to build. What do you think? Can Harley bounce back, or is it too late? Drop your take in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.